Welcome to The Explainer. It's absolutely fascinating how extreme political climates so often birth completely extreme forms of musical rebellion. And honestly, there's probably no better example of this wild phenomenon than a genre known as digital hardcore. Today, we're going to trace the lineage of this explosive sound and figure out exactly how and why it came to be. Okay, let's dive into this. At its very core, digital hardcore is the ultimate fusion genre. Think about taking the blistering attitude, the pure speed, and the heaviness of hardcore punk, heavy metal, and Riot Grrrl, and just smashing it headfirst into electronic dance music. We're talking breakbeat, gabber, techno, drum and bass, all mixed up with harsh industrial noise. It's abrasive, it is unbelievably fast, and it is intentionally, unapologetically cacophonous. To really get you in the right headspace for what this actually sounds like, music critic Jeff Tarich hit the nail on the head. He described the genre as being, quote, on the verge of reaching speeds incompatible with popular music, as if the rapid acceleration of BPMs would render the idea of rhythm irrelevant. I mean, just imagine that for a second. Music pushed so incredibly fast with electronic drum machines that the very concept of rhythm just literally starts to break apart. That's the chaotic sonic landscape we're exploring today. So here is our roadmap for today's journey. First, we'll look at punk behind the Iron Curtain. Second, we're defining digital hardcore. Third, we'll dive into Atari Teenage Riot. And finally, we'll explore a new wave of noise.
Part 1, Punk Behind the Iron Curtain, Rebellion in 1980s East Germany.
To really understand where this explosive energy came from, we've got to rewind to the deeply suppressive environment of communist East Germany, which is beautifully chronicled in Tim Moher's book, Burning Down the House. You see, there was this massive, stark contrast in what it actually meant to be a punk. In the western suburbs during the 70s and 80s, rebelling might get you detention or, at worst, grounded by your parents. But over in East Germany, the stakes were unimaginably high. Just writing a rebellious poem or wearing crude clothes held together with safety pins could lead to intense surveillance, psychological torture by the Stasi government agents, or even months locked in a jail cell. It was this extreme, high-stakes danger zone where just existing as part of the subculture was a profound act of resistance. So when the Berlin Wall finally fell in 1989, all that pent-up resistance and that deep, ingrained survival instinct, it didn't just vanish. Actually, it was those very same former Eastern punks who went on to build Berlin's uniquely politically active DIY nightlife scene in the early 90s. They squatted in abandoned buildings, they opened underground clubs, and they effectively laid the cultural groundwork for what would soon become a brand new, wildly aggressive electronic music movement.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next section, Section 2, Defining Digital Hardcore and the Sound of Atari Teenage Riot.
That historical tension we just talked about quickly found its voice in 1992 Berlin through a band called Atari Teenage Riot. What they did was take that foundational hardcore punk attitude and just layer it with driving techno and gabber beats. Then they threw in these frantic jungle and drum and bass rhythms, completely coating the whole shebang in harsh industrial noise textures. Formed by Alec Empire, Honey Nelias, and MC Carl Crack, the band specifically forged this chaotic, high-speed sound as a direct sonic weapon against the neo-Nazi subculture that was emerging in Germany at the time. Using heavily distorted samplers, synths, and drum machines, they created an absolutely uncompromising wall of sound. Section 3, Atari Teenage Riot, the Chaos and the Consequence. Now, the music definitely wasn't the only extreme thing about them. Their real-life trajectory was just as explosive. Forming in Berlin in 1992, they had blown up enough by 1996 to actually catch the attention of the Beastie Boys, who released their album on the Grand Royal label over in the US. By 1999, things hit a total boiling point when they were arrested at a massive protest in Berlin. In 2001, the band suffered a tragic loss with the death of Carl Crack, which led to a long hiatus before they eventually reformed in 2010. It is a wildly volatile history, but one that left a massive cultural footprint.
Actually, there's this fascinating, kind of hilarious anecdote from their early days. In 1993, a major European label called Phonogram Records signed them and handed over this massive financial advance. But instead of, delivering a commercially viable, radio-friendly demo to the label, Atari Teenage Riot duplicitously used that major label money to set up their own entirely underground, uncommercial, independent label called Digital Hardcore Recordings. They literally finessed the corporate music industry into funding their whole DIY anti-establishment operation. No way the label saw that coming. But the reality of their political stance was fraught with very real legal danger. In 1999, during a massive 30,000-strong protest against the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia in Berlin, the band actually performed from the back of a moving truck. While they were playing their track Revolution Action, severe conflicts broke out between the protesters and the police, and band members were arrested for inciting violence. It really highlights the stark contrast between playing a massive secure music festival and experiencing direct, high-stakes political clashes right there on the streets. Sadly, this intense, high-speed era of the band came to a very tragic halt. In September 2001, MC Carl Crack, who had been struggling with severe, worsening psychosis and psychiatric issues, tragically died from an overdose of unspecified pills. The remaining members were dealing with profound loss and really needed time to heal, so they decided to cancel their upcoming tours and went on a long hiatus shortly after to recharge. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4, A New Wave of Noise, Brooklyn's Spiritual Successors. You see, digital hardcore didn't just end in 1990s Berlin. That abrasive lineage survived, it evolved, and it found spiritual successors in modern-day Brooklyn with a group called Deli Girls. Formed in 2013 by Dan Orlovsky, critics have described their sound as, quote, noisy rave punk meets digital hardcore, and a genre-agnostic cacophony. From those descriptions alone, it's incredibly clear that Deli Girls are the direct sonic descendants of the abrasive, boundary-pushing lineage that Atari Teenage Riot kickstarted all those decades prior. And, much like their predecessors, Deli Girls explicitly fuse extreme noise with left-wing political messaging. Their methods are highly direct. We're talking collaborations with the Melting Point Collective for what they playfully call fund-raving, throwing intense underground parties to raise money for migrant rights. They've done live performances right outside ICE headquarters in New York City, and as recently as 2024, they've been engaging in direct noise protests at international music festivals. This connection to activism is deeply, deeply personal to the band. Deli Girls' 2023 self-titled album is actually dedicated to Brittany Kaipa, the late co-founder of that Melting Point Collective we just mentioned. That collective was specifically aimed at, in their own words, melting ICE, referring, of course, to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. It just goes to show how, for these artists, the intense, chaotic music they create is inextricably linked to the grassroots political causes they're supporting on the ground. So, the crucial point is, wherever this genre goes, direct and uncompromising political confrontation inevitably follows. Take May 2024, at the Trip Festival in Leipzig, Germany. Orlovsky faced opposition from festival staff over pro-Palestine visuals the band had asked to have projected during their set. In direct response to being repeatedly questioned and opposed by the staff, Orlovsky explained the situation to the audience and proceeded to play an entirely noise-based set in protest. The medium, that sheer aggressive noise, remains the message. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. From the heavily policed, dangerous streets of 1980s East Berlin to the 1990s anti-fascist techno squats, all the way to modern political protests in Brooklyn and Leipzig, environments shape sound. So I want to leave you with this question to ponder. As our world becomes more heavily digital and our global political climates continue to shift and polarize, what will the next generation of musical rebellions sound like? Thank you so much for joining us today and exploring the fascinating fringes of music history.